As you go through the course, one of the things that you're going to find is that I repeat a lot of information over and over. And I do that to put emphasis on certain aspects of dealing with your money. In some courses, I stay real general about it. In other courses, I do a deeper dive. And then there's some things that are so foundationally important that I will devote some time to it. And I want to talk a little bit today about what I call the young adult generation. And that's anybody that's graduating from high school and going out and getting a job, and anybody graduating from college and going and getting a job. And I think this generation is extremely important. It's going to make up the millennials, Generation Z, and there's debate as to when do these really start, these generations start. So we're just carving this niche out to the young adult generation. You spend 12 years going through public or private education. You spend another 4 or 5 years if you go the college route. And the unfortunate thing about all of that schooling is that nobody sat down to teach you about how money works. You never got that lesson. And so now you graduate and you start making more money than you ever made. Really, no matter what the income is, it's probably more money than you've ever made. And now you're having to make decisions with money that you're kind of shooting from the hip. And what happens as adults, I really believe this, what happens as adults, we kind of catch information on the fly. We read articles. We go through, maybe read a book or something just to figure out how to do things better with our money. And the problem is you make a lot of mistakes. And at the end of the day, is it going to be money or you that actually wins? And I think it's extremely important, very, very important for this generation to get this right. Now, here's what's interesting about the young adult generation is that I think that they're incredibly misunderstood. For the longest time, I always heard in reference to the millennials that they're self-absorbed, they're selfish, they think that they have everything should go their way, entitled. And it really is the opposite. Survey after survey would show, believe it or not, that generation is the most financially responsible generation that is out there. They save more money. They're committed to financial education. I mean, I have met millennials and worked with some that they're in their mid-20s and they've got $50,000, $60,000 worth of cash in the bank. They're saving. They're avoiding debt. They're doing the right things, and they're being intentional about it. So as you start out, you have the ability to develop good habits, and I think it's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, good habits will serve you the rest of your life. But the most important aspect, I think, of the young adult generation getting this right is that we've got to break the cycle of financial illiteracy. We've got to break the cycle of educated people that know how to deal with their money and start a new cycle of financial responsibility. And get that going. So that it's really important that they get that. If I had to, I talked about on one teaching course about an emergency fund, how important that is, and that's really one of the things tops of my list. Spending plan, having an effective spending plan that you're intentional about is probably number one, but number two, without question, would be the ability to live within your means. It's so very, very important. And this is one of the big challenges today that I see that we face is that people aren't very good at doing this. And I can unfortunately speak from experience, because when I got out of college and got my first job, started my career, living within my means was the last thing on my mind. Getting a new sports car was on my mind. Having a nice place to live was on my mind. And I was going to worry about everything else, the shortages, the debt, all that's down the road. I wanted to have fun and have a good time. And that catches up with you. The ability to live within your means is so very important, because you've got to be able to make it work with the income you have. Now, you start out with a lower income. And if you can make that lower income work, then you don't go crazy once you get promotions and your income increases and you've developed good habits. Here's what can happen to a person, though. They don't have a spending plan. And unfortunately, and this is why I'm speaking to this young adult generation, because my generation and the generation before me does not get it. They don't have spending plans. I can count a small percentage of people in almost 25 years of doing this that I've talked to that actually have an organized spending plan. Most people do not, and most people can't tell you what life costs, what the expenses are, and it's a real problem. So you don't have a spending plan. You're not intentional about spending money, and I love the word intentional because a spending plan is based on, and I talk about this in depth, by the way, in the boundary planning course, but a spending plan is based on your values, it's based on your goals, and it's based on the priority of those goals and those values. So you're intentional about every dollar that you spend. You're not just wasting money. So what ends up happening, though, if you don't have that, you're practicing what I call fantasy budgeting, hoping that you're going to have money at the end of the month after you spend all this money. And you spend all this money, and you go through, and then you come to the end of the month, you don't have it, so you start the debt balance, the credit cards. You go to the credit cards. You start building up a debt balance. You're still comfortable with it because you're making the minimum payment. That debt balance continues to grow. It gets bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden, just like that, you have a debt problem, a real bad debt problem. And then instead of living, you're surviving. You're trying to make those minimum payments. You're trying to get ahead of the debt, but the interest is growing that debt at such a rapid rate. And there's something about having a debt situation like that that just can really bring you down, hit your confidence levels, and set you back. And so that's what you want to avoid, and you have the ability to choose to do that. A crucial habit for success is making big goals. And you could have a whole long list of goals that you want to accomplish. In fact, here I was just thinking about some of the things that as you're a young adult, you're graduating, and you got to fund a retirement. You got to think about a retirement plan. You got to think about emergency fund. You've got to think about taxes. You got to think about health insurance. I mean, if you think about all of the things that you have to fund, you start thinking, well, I don't really have money for a new sports car. Well, I really don't have money for that nicer apartment. And so you start figuring all that, what's most important to you. Maybe it's, I want to get out of my student loan debt. And so you pick 2 or 3 things and you divide your life up into a season. So you say, for the next 5 years, I'm going to focus my emphasis on getting out of debt, getting out of student loan debt. That's going to be my big emphasis. And in order to do that, you develop some great habits if you're successful with it. Habits that you can build on to build your financial future. But it's so very important that you take 2 or 3 of these goals and you prioritize them. It's interesting. I always say that where you spend your money is where you value. If you want to see what you value in life, pull open your credit card statements and your bank statements and see where the money went. That's where you value. There's nothing wrong with if you spend $2,000 or a quarter eating out, or $500 a month, or whatever it is. Nothing wrong with that. That's what you value. Your money is following your values. The problem is that you don't have your values prioritized. And if you really sit down and go, what's really important to me? It's not eating out. It's all about getting out of debt. It's all about building an emergency fund. And so you start rearranging your values, and you find that eating out dropped to number 9 on the list, if you're real honest with yourself. But it's a hard process to go through because it means you have to change your ways, that you have to change your habits. And I put down there at the bottom what is ultimately important to you. Financial independence is a big one, because you want to get to a point, not that you retire, you want to get to a point that you choose to earn an income. And if you're at that point, that means that you could go to work, or you could say, I'm done with work so I can live off my investments. The only way to truly get there is live within your means. And it's a skill set that is absent with most people. Now, let's talk about steps to take here. The first one is you build a boundary plan. And here, this is information I'm being repetitive on because I have a whole course on boundary planning. I'm not a big believer in budgets, but that's why I developed this boundary plan, which is effectively a spending plan. And then you find out what the 2 or 3 most important things you want to prioritize. We talked about that you want to pick those 2 or 3 big goals. And then you want to focus on your habits. Remember, if you're just starting out, if you're part of that young adult generation, you want to say, okay, what is it that I'm doing that is supporting my values and goals, and what am I doing that's not supporting your values and goals? And change those habits before they become ingrained. Refuse to go into bad debt. Now, I break debt into good debt and bad debt. And there's certain financial thought leaders and commentators that say, oh, you shouldn't have any debt at all. I think you can effectively use debt to your advantage. It has to have these characteristics, though. Good debt is debt that doesn't control you. It doesn't change your financial system or your situation at all. And you know exactly when it's going to be paid off, and it's at a good low interest rate, competitive interest rate. That's good debt. That's good use of your money. But refuse to go into bad debt. Stay organized. This is a skill set that so many people don't have. And it's important to keep all your spending plan organized, your spending organized, your bank accounts, have good systems set up, and then commit to financial education. This is a big one. And fortunately, we're seeing that in this generation, that they are committed to financial education. And this is one of the reasons why I built this course, is because I built something that I wish I could have had access to as someone part of my generation when I graduated. Now, let's talk about the spending plan, because there's really two parts to it. There's the non-negotiable, and then there's discretionary spending. And I think that you have to be real honest with yourself, because it's so easy to rationalize. You know, I'll give a good example of someone who's maybe in sales, maybe self-employed, and they have to be disciplined at putting tax dollars back, but they're not, and they get behind in their taxes. You know, you have to really look at what all the non-negotiables, and a non-negotiable is a payment that if you don't make it, you have a problem. They take your car away, they evict you, they turn your electricity off. And so the key is to get that non-negotiable part of living within your means, of your spending plan, get that non-negotiable part down to the smallest percentages possible. That gives you enormous freedom on the other side, which is the discretionary spending, which is where you're spending money on things that you value. So it's important to really recognize these two, because I think that when a person goes out and racks up credit card debt and they're making a big credit card payment, that's not discretionary money. That's now non-discretionary. You've just increased your non-discretionary bucket, because you now have a credit card payment that you have to make. And so it's very important to realize that. So look at, and let me back up and say this, that a non-negotiable item such as rent can actually become a discretionary spending item. Let's say that you figure out of your entire income that you have coming in, that you're going to spend 20% of that on rent. Let's just use that as an example. But let's say that you go out, you find a place, and you really like it, and it's more than you wanted to spend, but you did it anyway. Now you're spending 30%. You've just taken 10% of discretionary income because you had to have it, and you didn't have to make that choice, but you made the choice, and now you have more on the non-discretionary side than you do on the discretionary spending side. The four biggest threats to living within your means: committing to a high percentage on your non-negotiable list. We talked about that just now. Not managing your discretionary spending and overspending. You've got to be able to manage your spending, and this is one of the things that I go through a lot in the courses, because I think it's the number one skill set that you got to have. Assuming you're going to pay for it later, and later never happens. One of the things that I see quite a bit is, and I always like to use the plasma screen TV. You walk into Best Buy, and you go back to the TVs, and you're just amazed with all the new technology, and you learn that they have a 12-month no interest loan. You just got to have it paid back by 12 months. And you go, oh, I know I could qualify for this. And so you qualify for it, you buy it, and you're just thinking in the back of your mind, 12 months from now, I'll have this thing paid off. It's no big deal. And then you get to 12 months and you can't pay it off. And now you got this big debt at a higher interest rate, and it's not working too well for you. And then giving into peer pressure by those who are screwing up their financial lives. I know you have friends that, they call you up and they'll tempt you to go out and maybe go on a trip with them, or go spend some money doing some other type of activity that you don't really have in the spending plan. And so don't give in to peer pressure, because that can also mess things up as well. Remember, something that is so true is that if you're in your 30s and 30s and up, not living within your means, life will end up forcing you to do so, and chances are it won't be pretty. But if you're just starting out, it's still within your control to define the habits, practice the habits, and have those habits ingrained. And with the good financial habits, I talk about this throughout the course all the time, with good financial habits, you will have a successful future, financial future. So my charge to the young adult generation is simply this: do it right the first time, develop those habits, and make sure that you're achieving the number 2 priority, which is living within your means.